Greetings and welcome back to the Shift Briefing Series. I'm David Pearson, and in this video I want to talk about the top 20 concept of the safety priorities. Let's get started. I really love the concept of the safety priorities. It informs so much of what we do, whether it be from the basic traffic stop or a domestic violence call, to the decisions that we make on a suicidal subject, the use of less lethal, whether officers should actually enter a house where somebody's armed, or in a more tactical realm, the execution of a search warrant, resolution of a barricade, or a hostage rescue problem. Many know the safety priorities, they're able to answer what they are. But as I go around the country, I find that knowing the concept and then applying it is sometimes a little bit more difficult. And whenever I talk about the safety priorities, I always say if you truly understand the safety priorities and you learn how to, and you have to learn how to apply that in many different circumstances, it makes very hard decisions easy. So what are the safety priorities? Well, hostages, innocent civilians, officers, and when I talk about officers, that's deputy sheriffs, patrol officers, corrections, law enforcement officials or officers in general. And then if they're a suicidal person, it's a subject, or if they've committed a crime, they're a suspect. And why are they in that order? You know, when I first got into this business about 28 years ago, I was told, you're number one, you should always go home alive. And if that was truly the case, and I understand what they were trying to say, but if the shots were being fired over there, I'd probably go that way if I was truly number one. And we know that's not what our profession is about. And I think sometimes we would benefit if we would actually educate the public as to how many people are really above us on the priority scale. But the other thing I talk about is when you look at the list, they're on the list. Oftentimes when I ask about the suspect, I get some offhanded comment about we don't care about him or whatever, and we know that's not true. We should respect and cherish life. And when we talk about the safety priorities, and some people call them the priorities of life, but I like to call them the safety priorities, and the reason why is it just cleans that message up a little bit. A priority does not equate to value. We should value all life. And when we stop valuing life, it's probably time to get out of this business. And think about if we did a little bit more education to the public, because I think they also confuse this idea of priority with value, and that's just not accurate. And I think if we took some time to educate the public, it would help them understand why we do some of the things that we do. So when we look at applying the safety priorities on a daily basis in patrol, I'm going to use just 3 quick examples in this short video, and then I'll talk about a couple on the tactical side, on a SWAT side. So the first thing is the suicidal subject. If you saw the video on police response to suicidal subjects, you'll see how I use the safety priorities to answer the question that a lot of people ask. Should we go on suicidal subjects? And my answer to that is yes. I think the safety priorities dictate that they're on the list. We should try to help them out, because if we don't help them out, who's going to? But the other part of the safety priorities is it tells us that we're probably not going to go up and take the gun out of someone's hand. And I've heard people say, well, Dave, obviously no one's going to go take a gun out of somebody's hand. And I'm going to beg to differ with you. I was reading an article, and it's been a couple of years ago, where 2 officers went on a suicidal call. And as the call progressed, they ended up going inside of the house, which we're going to talk about in a second. And at one point, one of the officers is so close to the person, they actually can reach over and grab the gun out of a person's hand. Well, they gave both of those officers Medal of Valors. And when we talk about decision making in another video and we talk about administrative pressure, I want you to think about the message that we just sent to somebody. So I use the safety priorities to kind of educate individuals or officers on whether or not we should go on suicidal calls, and then kind of how we should handle those calls. And that leads in a conversation about less lethal. Oftentimes people are concerned about either using an impact munition or chemical agents on a call and trying to figure out whether or not they should do that. Oftentimes I hear, well, what happens if something goes bad? But the safety priorities would dictate, especially if you're talking about a suicidal subject, we can't walk up and take the gun out of their hands, and we can't just shoot them. So what are we going to do? And less lethal is a great option for that. And less lethal philosophy is a set of use of force options that bridge the gap between standard use of force, which is our hands, baton, and OC, and deadly force. It allows us to fill in that gap in between those and handle the problem. The third thing that I want to talk about with the safety priorities is this idea of entering a house where someone is known to be armed. And when we train patrol in general, and if I say the average patrol officer or the average SWAT cop, in no way am I trying to be disrespectful, but there's a certain amount of training the average patrol officer gets and a certain amount of training that a SWAT officer gets. And so when we're talking about critical incidents on patrol, we say anytime a patrol officer is entering a structure where there's somebody known to be armed, some sort of flag should be waved and an alarm should be sounding. Because we're now taking that suspect and our attempts to get them into custody and placing that above ourselves. And so we've kind of switched the safety priorities. So when we look at that, there are some other options besides going into the house that we should look at. And so on the patrol side of that, those are just 3 quick ways to use the safety priorities. Another way in a tactical realm, and I would just use 2, and it has to do with chemical agents. Oftentimes when we get a barricaded suspect in a house, I hear a lot of team leaders, and I was just in Minnesota talking to a bunch of team leaders, and they talked about this issue of the use of chemical agents to get somebody outside on a barricade. And oftentimes people are getting up close to the door as a SWAT team, and they're actually making entry and not using some of the tools that are available to them. And I usually say, well, you've kind of just flipped the safety priorities and put their safety ahead of yours because you're worried about using a chemical agent. The other thing that I talk about in using chemical agents is in a crowd environment. Oftentimes with either political or public pressure, we don't want to use chemical agents in a crowd environment. And what I tell people is it relates right back to the safety priorities. And usually we don't have hostages in a crowd environment, so we can take that out. But in the average crowd environment, regardless of the message, we don't care what their message is. As police officers, our duty is to protect their First Amendment right. But when their activities and when their behavior starts to threaten our citizens or our police officers, we have an ability to respond based on the safety priorities. So if you're burning our city down, we should be able to use some level of force, whether it be chemical agents or otherwise, to get that under control. And I think if we educate our public as to why we're doing that, as opposed to we don't like your message, if we talk to them about the safety priorities and say we're trying to protect many of you, I think that makes that a little bit easier to talk about. Okay, so I hope you found this video helpful. If you liked it and would like to see more information, please subscribe. I'm going to try to get more content out. I just started. And if you have any questions or anything, my contact information is at the end. So thank you again, be safe, and I look forward to the next time we meet on the Shift Briefing Series.